The Valorian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years. They owned more stars than anyone could count. Their ships were beautiful and deadly, made of silver crystal that could bend light itself. Their armies had crushed thousands of species across millions of worlds. No one had ever said no to them. No one had ever even tried. When their long-range sensors picked up strange radio signals from a small blue planet on the edge of the galaxy, they did what they always did. They sent a ship to claim it. The diplomatic cruiser was 5 kilometers long. It looked like a frozen snowflake made of glass and metal, and it carried enough weapons to turn a moon into dust. Inside, Ambassador Kethmari prepared his standard speech. He had given it many times before. Surrender your world. Join our empire. Resistance is foolish. The speech usually took about 10 minutes. The surrender usually took less. Captain Laura Bennett was having a normal day when everything changed. She was 42 years old, with short gray hair and tired eyes that had seen too much space. Her ship, the Horizon's Edge, was small and old. It was doing a routine patrol near Neptune, checking for asteroids and running system tests. Nothing exciting ever happened out here. Then the alien ship appeared. It came out of nowhere, ripping a hole in space itself. One moment, there was empty darkness. The next moment, there was something impossibly huge, glowing with soft silver light. Laura stared at her screens. Her mouth went dry. Her hands began to shake. But her voice stayed calm. It had to. "Danny," she said to her communications officer. "Are you seeing this?" Danny Price was 26 years old. He had joined the space service because he thought it would be boring and safe. He was very wrong. His fingers trembled over his controls as he ran scan after scan, hoping each one would tell him something different. "It's real, Captain. 5 kilometers long. Energy readings are off the charts. And?" He swallowed hard. "They're hailing us." Laura nodded slowly. She had trained for first contact. Everyone in the space service had. But training was one thing. Seeing an alien warship the size of a city was something else entirely. Put them through. The main screen flickered. Then a face appeared. It was not a human face. The being was tall and thin, with skin that seemed to glow from within. It had 4 long arms and eyes like pools of liquid gold. When it spoke, the words came through in perfect English. Their translation technology was very advanced. "I am Ambassador Kethmari of the Valorian Empire. Your world has been selected for integration. You will surrender immediately. Your people will serve the Empire. Your resources will fuel our expansion. This is not a negotiation. This is a notification." Laura listened carefully. She watched the alien's face. She noticed how confident he looked. How bored, even. Like this was just another task on a long list. Like humanity was just another box to check. Something shifted inside her. The fear was still there, but something else was growing alongside it. Something that felt a lot like stubbornness. "That's very interesting," Laura said. "Could you tell me more about this integration process? What exactly does it involve?" Kethmari blinked. His forearms twitched slightly. This was not the usual response. Usually there was screaming by now, or crying, or desperate attempts to fight. "The process is simple," he said slowly. "Your species will be cataloged. Your planet will be assessed. Your resources will be allocated according to imperial needs. Your people will be assigned roles within our system." "I see. And how long does this cataloging take?" "That depends on the species. What's the average?" Kethmari paused. No one had ever asked about averages before. "Perhaps 40 of your years." 40 years? That seems like a long time. Is there a lot of paperwork involved?" "There are forms, yes. Laura nodded thoughtfully. Behind her, Danny was staring at her like she had lost her mind. But Laura had spent 20 years dealing with military bureaucracy. She knew something that the great Valorian Empire did not. She knew that the most powerful force in any universe was not weapons or technology. It was paperwork. Ambassador, I think there might be some misunderstanding here. Before we discuss surrender, I really think we should review the proper procedures. Could you send over the relevant documentation? Kethmari's golden eyes narrowed. Documentation? Yes, the forms you mentioned. The process guidelines. The legal framework for planetary integration. I assume there are rules about this sort of thing? Of course there are rules. The Empire has rules for everything. Wonderful. Then please send them over. We want to make sure everything is done correctly. There was a long silence. On the Valorian ship, Kethmari turned to his aide, a younger Valorian named Tess. Is she asking for the bureaucratic manuals? Tess checked her records. No species has ever asked for those before. Why would they? I don't know. Should we send them? Kethmari thought about it. The Empire had strict rules about information sharing with pre-conquest species. But there were also rules about cooperation with willing subjects. And technically, she was asking nicely. Send them, he said finally. Perhaps they simply want to understand what awaits them. Back on the horizon's edge, Laura watched as terabytes of data began streaming into her ship's computers. Imperial tax codes, resource allocation protocols, integration timelines, labor assignment procedures, 17 different forms just for registering a new species. She smiled. On Earth, the news spread fast. Aliens were real. They had a giant ship. They wanted humanity to surrender. The world erupted into panic. Governments held emergency meetings. Militaries went on high alert. People prayed or cried or hid in their basements. But in a small office in New York, Secretary General Maya Santos read through Captain Bennett's report with growing interest. Maya was 61 years old. She had spent her life in diplomacy. She had negotiated ceasefires and trade deals and territorial disputes that everyone said were impossible to solve. She knew that every problem had a solution. You just had to find the right-angle dot, and as she read through the mountain of Valorian paperwork, she began to see the angle. They're not warriors, she said softly. They're bureaucrats. She picked up her phone and called an emergency meeting. Humanity had a lot of work to do. Not fighting. Something much more dangerous: dot planning. The emergency meeting took place in a bunker beneath the United Nations building. The room was full of the most important people on Earth. Presidents and prime ministers. Generals and admirals. Scientists and diplomats. They all looked tired and scared. The weight of the world sat heavy on their shoulders. Secretary General Maya Santos stood at the front of the room. Behind her, a massive screen displayed the Valorian ship still hovering near Neptune. It had not moved. It had not attacked. It was waiting. Ladies and gentlemen, Maya said calmly, we have a choice to make. We can fight. We can surrender. Or we can do something else entirely. A general from the United States stood up. His name was Frank Coleman, and he had been playing wars for 30 years. What exactly do you mean by something else? That ship could destroy our entire planet. Yes, it could, Maya agreed. But it hasn't. And I've been reading through the documents they sent us. The Valorians don't want to destroy us. Destruction is wasteful. They want to integrate us into their empire. They want our resources and our labor. So we're supposed to just give up? No, we're supposed to make giving up very, very complicated. She pressed a button and the screen changed. It now showed pages and pages of Valorian legal text. Forms and regulations and procedures stretching on forever. The Valorian Empire has been conquering worlds for 12,000 years. In that time, they have developed the most complex bureaucratic system in the galaxy. Everything requires approval. Everything requires documentation. Everything requires forms filled out in triplicate and submitted to the proper authorities. A French diplomat named Claire de Bois leaned forward. You want to use their own system against them? I want to drown them in it. The plan that emerged was unlike anything humanity had ever attempted. They would not fight the Valorians. They would not surrender to them. Instead, they would ask questions. Endless questions. They would request clarifications and demand explanations. They would find every loophole and every unclear regulation. They would turn the Valorian bureaucracy into a weapon. Dr. Greg Palmer, a xenobiologist from California, was put in charge of studying the aliens themselves. He spent 3 days without sleep, reading everything the Valorians had sent. On the 4th day, he called Maya with his findings. They're obsessed with hierarchy, he explained. Everything in their society is ranked. Higher species rule lower species, and they determine rank by technological development. Since we haven't developed faster than light travel yet, we're automatically considered inferior. That's not very flattering. No, but it's useful, because inferior species have certain rights in their system. They can ask questions. They can request assistance. They can appeal decisions. And superior species are obligated to respond. It's part of their cultural code. Maya smiled. So if we ask nicely, they have to answer? According to their own rules, yes. The next day, Captain Laura Bennett contacted Ambassador Kethmari again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her was a team of 7 lawyers, 3 accountants, 2 diplomats, and a cheerful woman from the State Department named Betty Collins, whose job was to be extremely friendly. Ambassador, Betty said with a bright smile, it's so wonderful to speak with you again. We've been reviewing the integration documents, and we just have a few tiny questions. Kethmari stared at the screen. He had conquered 17 worlds in his career. None of them had brought lawyers to the surrender. Questions? Just a few hundred to start. Betty held up a thick stack of papers. For example, Form 17B for resource allocation mentions a standard atmospheric assessment. But Form 23C for labor assignment uses a different atmospheric baseline. Which one takes priority? I would need to check. Of course. Take your time. Oh, and while you're checking, could you also clarify the pension provisions in Section 445? Some of our citizens are concerned about their retirement benefits. The questions continued for 6 hours. Every time Kethmari answered one, 3 more appeared. His staff grew from 3 to 15, then to 50, all working desperately to find answers to questions no one had ever asked before. On Earth, the strategy was spreading. Universities opened special departments for Valorian legal studies. Accounting firms analyzed imperial tax codes. Law students wrote papers about integration procedures. It became a global effort. Millions of people, all searching for ways to make the conquest more complicated. Pete Morrison was a tax accountant from Ohio. He was 53 years old, mostly bald, and had spent his entire career finding tiny errors in financial documents. When the government asked for volunteers to analyze Valorian records, he raised his hand immediately. Look at this, he told his team 3 weeks later, pointing at his screen. Section 892, paragraph 7. It says that resource extraction rates must be adjusted for atmospheric variations greater than 0.001% from imperial standard. So, Earth's atmosphere is 0.003% different from their standard. That means every single resource calculation they do will need a variance form. And variance forms require approval from the Regional Resource Council. How often does that council meet? Pete grinned. Once every 3 galactic cycles. That's about 18 Earth years. The news spread quickly. One tiny regulation could delay Valorian operations for almost 2 decades. And there were thousands of regulations just like it. Ambassador Kathmari began receiving daily reports that made no sense to him. The humans were cooperating. They were filling out forms. They were attending meetings. But somehow, nothing was getting done. Every form led to another form. Every meeting led to another meeting. Every answer led to more questions that he called the Valorian homeworld for guidance. The Ministry of Integration promised to send experts. But the experts had questions too. And the humans were happy to answer them. In great detail. With charts and graphs and supplementary documentation. High Commander Zethral, the supreme leader of the Valorian military, received his first report about Earth 6 months after first contact. He read it 3 times, unable to believe what he was seeing. They haven't surrendered? Not exactly, Commander. They haven't fought? Also not exactly. Then what are they doing? His aide paused. They're asking about our insurance policies. Zethral closed all 4 of his eyes. Somewhere in the galaxy, a small blue planet was doing something no species had ever done before. They were defeating the Empire with paperwork, and they were just getting started. 1 year had passed since the Valorian ship first appeared near Neptune. In any normal conquest, the planet would already be part of the Empire. The humans would be working in mines or factories. Their resources would be flowing to Valorian worlds. Everything would be orderly and efficient. Instead, the Valorian diplomatic mission had grown to 4,000 staff members. They had taken over an entire space station to handle the paperwork. And they were still falling behind. Ambassador Kathmari had not slept properly in 3 months. His golden eyes had lost their shine. His forearms moved slowly, tired from signing endless documents. He had requested retirement 17 times. Each request had been denied because the proper retirement forms required approval from the Ministry of Personnel, which was still processing requests from 2 years ago. On Earth, humanity had turned bureaucratic warfare into an art form. Universities gave degrees in imperial procedure studies. Television shows explained Valorian tax law to ordinary citizens. Even children played games, where they pretended to fill out alien forms. The paperwork was only part of the plan. Dr. Natalie Cruz, an anthropologist from New Mexico, had discovered something even more useful. She had spent 8 months studying Valorian culture. She had learned their language, their customs, their history. And she had found their weakness. Gift-giving, she explained to the UN Council. In Valorian society, refusing a gift is deeply shameful. It suggests that you're afraid the gift contains some power you cannot handle. Superior species must always accept gifts from inferior ones. It's a matter of honor. Secretary General Maya Santos leaned forward. So if we give them gifts, they have to accept them. Every single one. The gift campaign began 3 days later. At first, the presents were simple. Books about Earth history, music recordings, samples of food. The Valorians accepted them politely, unsure what to do with things like chocolate or jazz music. Then the gifts became more complicated. A school in Kansas sent Ambassador Kathmari a handmade quilt with 847 individual squares, each one representing a different student. Accepting the gift was simple, but Valorian custom required him to acknowledge each contributor personally. Writing 847 thank you notes took 3 weeks. A town in Italy sent traditional pottery. The pots arrived in 2,400 separate pieces with detailed instructions for assembly. Refusing to assemble them would insult Italian culture. It took 4 months. A grandmother from Texas named Dorothy Miller sent a scrapbook of her family history going back 7 generations. Each page had notes. Each note had questions. Each question required research to answer properly. Dorothy was 81 years old, with white hair and a warm smile that hit a sharp mind. She had raised 5 children, survived 2 husbands, and beaten cancer twice. A bunch of aliens who wanted to take over her planet didn't scare her one bit. I included a recipe for my famous apple pie. She wrote in her letter to Kethmari. I hope you'll try making it. Let me know if you have any questions. The recipe was 14 pages long. Every step required specialized equipment. The nearest apples were on Earth, which meant arranging an import license. Import licenses required environmental assessments. Environmental assessments took years. Kethmari stared at the recipe and felt something he had never felt before: despair. But Dorothy wasn't finished. She had joined a pen pal program connecting humans with Valorian diplomatic staff. She wrote letters every week. Long letters. Detailed letters. Letters with photos attached. This is my grandson Tommy at his baseball game. This is my cat Mr. Whiskers sleeping on the couch. This is the sunset from my back porch last Tuesday. It reminded me of your beautiful ship. Do sunsets on your planet look similar? Each letter required a response. Valorian politeness protocols demanded it. And Dorothy had recruited 200 other grandmothers to join her. They called themselves the Silver Letter Brigade. Meanwhile, the questions kept coming. Pete Morrison had assembled a team of accountants dedicated to finding problems in Valorian financial regulations. They worked 12 hours a day, drinking coffee and searching for contradictions. Found another one, announced Linda Hayes, a former IRS auditor who had been fired for being too thorough. Section 1247 says that resource surveys must be completed before labor allocation. But Section 3891 says labor allocation must be completed before resource surveys can begin. They contradict each other. What happens when regulations contradict? Pete asked. According to their own rules, both regulations are suspended until a resolution committee makes a decision. How long does that take? Linda smiled. The average is 47 years. They found 6 more contradictions that week. Each one froze another part of the conquest process. Each one created more work for the overwhelmed Valorian staff. On the Valorian homeworld, the Ministry of Integration was in chaos. They had never dealt with anything like this before. Usually, conquered species accepted their fate quietly. They didn't ask questions. They didn't send gifts. They certainly didn't point out flaws in imperial regulations. Minister Vothkin called an emergency meeting. His staff looked exhausted. Many of them had been working on the Earth problem for months without rest. We need more resources, someone said. There are no more resources. Every available administrator has already been assigned to this project. Then we need to simplify our procedures. Simplification requires approval from the High Council. The approval process takes, I know how long it takes. The room fell silent. Outside the window, the twin suns of the Valorian homeworld were setting. Somewhere across the galaxy, a small blue planet was slowly winning an impossible war without firing a single shot. High Commander Zethral received weekly reports about Earth now. Each one was longer than the last. Each one contained more problems. The humans weren't just asking questions anymore. They were suggesting improvements. They were pointing out inefficiencies. They were offering to help. That was the most disturbing part. They seemed genuinely helpful, as if they really wanted the conquest to succeed, just with better paperwork. Zethral had spent his life studying military strategy. He understood weapons and tactics and battle plans, but this was something completely different. He was beginning to suspect that he was losing. 2 years after first contact, humanity launched its most dangerous weapon yet. Not missiles or bombs. Not clever illegal arguments or complicated forms. Something far more powerful. Friendship. The Goodwill Ambassador Program was Betty Collins' idea. She had spent 2 years being relentlessly cheerful with Valorian officials. She had learned that behind their stern golden faces, they were just people. Tired people. Confused people. People who had been taught their whole lives that they were superior, but were starting to wonder if that was really true. They're lonely, Betty told the UN Council. They spend years away from home, conquering worlds that hate them. Nobody ever wants to talk to them. Nobody ever asks how they're doing. Secretary General Maya Santos nodded slowly. You want to befriend them? I want to overwhelm them with kindness. The program recruited 10,000 volunteers in its first week. Teachers and farmers, doctors and artists, retired soldiers and college students. They all had one thing in common. They were genuinely good at making people feel welcome. The first group arrived at the Valorian space station on a Tuesday. They brought food. They brought music. They brought an unstoppable desire to connect. A Valorian guard named Deshkal was the first to crack. She had been assigned to watch the human visitors and report any suspicious behavior. Instead, she found herself sitting in a corner, eating something called a brownie, while a retired firefighter named Joe Murphy showed her pictures of his dogs. This one is Max, Joe said, pointing at a golden retriever. He's 8 years old. Loves swimming. And this is Bella. She's a rescue. Took her 2 years to trust people again, but now she's the sweetest girl you ever met. Deshko had never seen a dog before. She had certainly never had anyone share something personal with her during a conquest. They look soft, she said quietly. They are. Want to see a video of them playing? She did. She watched 3 hours of dog videos that night. The next morning, she requested a transfer away from Earth duties. Her request was denied, but something had changed inside her. She wasn't sure what anymore. The friendship offensive spread quickly. Human volunteers learned Valorian names and remembered birthdays. They asked about families and hobbies and dreams. They treated the conquerors like neighbors instead of enemies. And slowly, the Valorians began to respond. It started small. A smile returned. A question answered honestly instead of officially. A moment of real conversation between beings from different worlds. Ambassador Kathmari was invited to a potluck dinner in Iowa. It was Dorothy Miller's idea. She had been writing to him for 2 years and decided it was time to meet in person. You can't be serious, his security chief said. I have to go. Refusing hospitality from a subordinate species would violate Article 77 of the Cultural Dignity Protocols. Then I'm coming with you. With 40 guards. Fine, but bring an appetite. Dorothy says she's making her famous apple pie. The potluck was held at a community center in the small town of Riverside. Population 2,847. The whole town came out to meet the aliens. Children pressed against windows to stare at the tall, glowing beings in their silver uniforms. Old men sat on benches and pretended not to be impressed. Dorothy was waiting at the door. She was smaller than Kathmari had imagined, barely reaching his chest. But her smile was exactly like her letters, warm and impossible to resist. Ambassador, you came. She grabbed one of his 4 hands and shook it firmly. Come in, come in. I want you to meet everyone. What followed was the strangest experience of Kathmari's long career. He met farmers who wanted to know about Valorian agriculture. He met teachers who asked about alien education. He met a 6-year-old girl named Sophie who demanded to know if he had any pets. We do not keep companion animals, he admitted. Sophie looked horrified. That's so sad. Everyone should have a pet. You can share mine." She held up a stuffed rabbit. "His name is Mr. Hoppy. You can borrow him while you're on Earth." Kethmari stared at the small fabric creature. It had button eyes and floppy ears. It was clearly well loved, its fur worn from years of hugging. Refusing a gift from a child was unthinkable. He took Mr. Hoppy gently in his lower hands. "Thank you," he said. His voice sounded strange to him. Softer somehow. Sophie beamed. "Take good care of him." The pie was delicious. Kethmari had never tasted anything like it. Sweet and warm and somehow comforting in a way that Valorian food never was. He ate 3 slices while Dorothy told him stories about her grandchildren. "You're not what I expected," he admitted finally. "When we arrived, I thought this would be simple. Your species would surrender. Your world would be integrated. Everything would follow the standard process." Dorothy laughed. "Honey, nothing about humans is standard. I'm beginning to understand that." She patted his arm with her wrinkled hand. "You know what I think? I think your empire has been doing things the same way for so long. You forgot. There might be other ways. You're not bad people. You're just stuck." Kethmari had no response to that. It was too close to the truth. Back on the Valorian homeworld, reports of the Friendship Offensive caused confusion and concern. Soldiers assigned to Earth were requesting permanent postings. Administrators were learning human languages for fun. Someone had started a book club reading Earth literature. High Commander Zethral read the reports in his private office. His 4 hands trembled slightly. In 12,000 years of conquest, no species had ever tried to make friends with their conquerors. It wasn't supposed to work, but it was working. Something fundamental was shifting in the Empire. Something that no weapon could have achieved. The humans weren't just resisting conquest. They were changing the meaning of it. And Zethral didn't know if he should be terrified or impressed. 3 years after the Valorian ship first appeared in human space, High Commander Zethral made a decision that shocked the entire Empire. He announced that he would travel to Earth personally to resolve the situation. No High Commander had ever visited an unconquered world. It simply wasn't done. The risk was too great, the symbolism too dangerous. If something happened to Zethral on Earth, it would be a disaster for the Empire. But Zethral was tired. Tired of reading reports that made no sense. Tired of watching his conquest collapse under the weight of friendship and paperwork. Tired of pretending that everything was going according to plan. "I need to see them for myself," he told his advisors. "I need to understand." His ship arrived on a bright spring morning. It landed in a field outside New York City, its crystal hull gleaming in the sunlight. Millions of people watched the broadcast around the world. This was it. The moment that would decide everything. Secretary General Maya Santos led the welcoming delegation. She was older now, her hair gray at the temples, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. Beside her stood Captain Laura Bennett, promoted to Admiral for her role in First Contact. And of course, Dorothy Miller was there. She had refused to miss this for anything. "I'm 84 years old," she had told the security team that tried to keep her away. "I've been writing to these aliens for 3 years. They're not going to hurt me." Zethral stepped off his ship and looked at the crowd of humans waiting to greet him. They weren't armed. They weren't afraid. Many of them were actually smiling. He had conquered 47 worlds in his career. He had seen species tremble before him. He had watched civilizations fall. But he had never seen anything like this. "Welcome to Earth, High Commander," Maya said, stepping forward with her hand extended. "We're honored by your visit." Zethral stared at her hand. He knew what the gesture meant. He had studied human customs extensively since this whole disaster began. Slowly, carefully, he reached out one of his 4 hands and shook hers. The crowd cheered. The negotiations lasted 3 days. They were held in a conference room at the United Nations, with translators and advisors and representatives from every nation on Earth. But the real conversations happened in smaller moments. On the first night, Dorothy Miller invited Zethral to dinner at her home. It was a simple farmhouse with a big kitchen and photos on every wall. She served him pot roast and mashed potatoes and more apple pie than one being should eat. "I've been thinking about your empire," she said while he struggled with a human fork. 12,000 years of conquest. That's a long time. It is the foundation of everything we are. But is it everything you could be? Zethral set down his fork. "What do you mean?" Dorothy smiled, the same warm smile that had launched 1,000 letters. "My husband passed away 20 years ago. We were married for 52 years. When he died, I thought my life was over. Everything I knew was built around him. I didn't know who I was alone." She looked out the window at the fields stretching toward the horizon. "But then I realized something. I wasn't alone. I had my children and grandchildren. I had neighbors and friends. I had a whole community that cared about me. I just had to let them in. What does this have to do with my empire? You've been conquering for so long, you forgot how to connect. You have all these rules about superior and inferior species. But we're all just people, aren't we? Different shapes, different worlds, but people. We all want the same things. To belong, to matter, to be seen." Zethral said nothing, but something in his golden eyes had shifted. On the final day of negotiations, he stood before the assembly and did something unprecedented. He admitted that the conquest had failed. 3 years ago, we came to claim your world. We had done it thousands of times before. We expected the same result. He paused, looking around the room at the human faces watching him. "We were wrong." The room was silent. "You did not fight us with weapons. You did not surrender in fear. Instead, you did something no species has ever done. You welcomed us. You asked us questions. You offered us pie." A few humans laughed nervously. "You showed us kindness when you had every reason to hate us. And somehow, that was more powerful than any weapon we have ever faced." He turned to face Secretary General Maya Santos directly. "The Valorian Empire does not know how to conquer a species that wants to be friends. So I propose something new. Not conquest. Not surrender. Partnership." The Terra Accords were signed 1 week later. They established Earth as an independent partner of the Valorian Empire. Humans would share their knowledge of bureaucratic efficiency, customer service, and something called community building. In return, the Valorians would share technology and open the galaxy to human exploration. It was the first partnership in 12,000 years of Valorian history. Ambassador Kethmari was reassigned to Earth permanently at his own request. He opened a small office in Riverside, Iowa, where he worked on cultural exchange programs and had dinner at Dorothy's house every Sunday. He still carried Mr. Hoppy in his pocket. Sophie had made him promise. Captain Laura Bennett, now Admiral Bennett, was given command of humanity's first faster-than-light starship. She named it the Horizon's Edge 2, in honor of the small patrol ship where everything had started, and Dorothy Miller received the Valorian Empire's highest civilian honor for services to interspecies relations. She displayed it in her kitchen, next to photos of her grandchildren and a thank you note from a 6-year-old girl named Sophie. On the day Earth's first ambassador departed for the Valorian homeworld, billions of people watched the broadcast. The ambassador's name was Kevin Park. He was a former elementary school teacher from Minnesota, chosen because of his ability to explain complicated things simply and make anyone feel comfortable. He carried a suitcase full of gifts, photographs and recipes, books and music, small pieces of human culture to share with a galaxy that had never known friendship. And, in his pocket, he carried a recipe card in Dorothy Miller's careful handwriting. "My famous apple pie," she had said when she gave it to him. Every good relationship starts with something sweet. The Valorian Empire had ruled the galaxy for 12,000 years through fear and conquest and overwhelming power. They had never lost a war, but they had never met humans before. They had never faced a species that weaponized kindness, defeated armies with paperwork, and conquered empires with apple pie and dog videos and letters from grandmothers who just wanted to say hello. Humanity didn't make the Valorians look like fools. They made them look in a mirror and ask themselves if there might be a better way. And that, in the end, was the greatest victory of all.